What can you say when everything has already been said about something? Resident Evil 4 has had countless reviews, video essays, blogs, podcasts, and books about it. It's been cracked wide open, parodied, remade, and even cloned for its reinvention of third-person over-the-shoulder combat. Resident Evil 4 is known as the peak of this massive series, a series that is still breaking sales records to this day with each entry. No matter how many games they release or years go by, you're never more than an hour away from someone making some kind of Resident Evil 4 content. Whether it's a retrospective or a shirt with Leon in front of an Arby's, somebody is constantly putting Resident Evil 4 out into the world. I guarantee somebody somewhere has scratched the insignia into a bathroom stall wall. But even though so much has already been said, I committed to a series of talking all things Resident Evil, so I can't just skip the greatest game in the whole series, or even the greatest game of all time, in my personal opinion, Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4.
I vividly remember the day I first saw it, walking into a friend's house with my older brother while everyone was crowded around the TV, making fun of his mom's boyfriend for using the shotgun on every single thing that moved, wasting all his ammo, in between hastily wandering around the dimly lit castle. And I remember weeks later when I finally got my own hands on it. It was a big deal after all, the first M-rated game my mom ever bought for us. We spent hours, days. At this point, I've probably spent over an entire year combing over every inch of this game, starting out with things like learning how to spot bear traps and tripwires before I permanently committed the locations of all of them to my memory, or like where to shoot the Ganados to take them down quickly while still saving as much ammo as possible, which isn't always the head. 2012 meme incoming in about 6 seconds, or even realizing that every single painting of Sadler in the castle has gold behind it. Eventually new games and consoles came, and Resident Evil 4 was left behind by everyone except for me. Yes, I did still play a lot of other games, obviously. Insert stream plug here, a lot of them are Tony Hawk, but it did end up becoming a bit of a tradition for me to revisit it every single October. October has always been a very busy time for me, and it's the Halloween season. So I started to throw on Resident Evil 4 every year because it's something I knew so well, so I could still shut my brain off but enjoy a game at the same time. And that tradition still carries on to this day, as I play Resident Evil 4 for this video, and every year since I've gotten deeper and deeper into the game, learning more advanced things than gold behind paintings like the Ditman glitch. But Resident Evil 4 wasn't always perfect. If you've seen any bit of Resi 4 content, you probably know that Resident Evil 4 had a pretty troubled development cycle that ended up leading to the creation of other Capcom franchises and concepts before it became what it is today. One of these was known as the stylized version, because it was built to completely change the series by making it a highly stylized action game with an over-the-top main character named Tony. Tony ended up later being renamed to Dante and given a sword, and also became the protagonist of the great Devil May Cry series, because this idea strayed a little bit too far from what Resident Evil is, but it was still freaking sick, so they needed to make its own game out of it. And I'm glad they did, because I'm also a DMC sicko. That later led to the Myst version, where Leon investigates the main Umbrella headquarters, which is just a giant castle, and there he becomes infected with a virus giving him powers in his left hand after his squad is attacked by a giant black fog, leaving only him alive. This version was scrapped due to the console limitations of the fog enemy, which is how this version got its name, translating from mist. A very similar creature to the fog was later used in the next generation on the 360 and PS3 in Resident Evil 5, known as the Ouroboros monster, but that's a tomorrow topic. Around the start of this current version of the game, Shinji Mikami decided to go all in on the GameCube, announcing ports of the entire series up until this point, a remake of the first game, including the announcement of the Capcom 5. And we have all of that to thank for not getting this fog version because of the limitations of the GameCube. Then came what is known by fans as the Hookman version or the hallucination version. It's set in a haunted building of some sort that a few people have decided is also the location of the Lost in Nightmares DLC of Resident Evil 5, but I can't confirm or deny that because no one really knows, so it's a haunted building. This version was also very paranormal heavy, which is something the series is still yet to touch on outside of like a brief Easter egg in 7, but that's a topic for next year. But this version was dubbed the Hookman version by the public thanks to a ghost-like enemy that follows Leon around with a large hook. It also had a bluish tint opposed to the brown and gray that we're used to, and it was full of these dreamlike and hallucination sequences. Enemies would appear that weren't really there, or the whole room would be different, causing the game to need two versions of every location loaded in at the same time, which was surprisingly possible on the GameCube, but issues would arise when they tried to add enemies into the equation. A lot of these ideas have yet to return to the Resident Evil franchise, but we saw something very similar to this idea with the Medium. And then there was also one that was known as the zombie version, which took the game back to the series roots of regular zombies. Very little is known about this version, other than that this is where the idea of the DARPA Man enemy was created, which would later be used in the final version of Resident Evil 4 as the Ganado. And finally, after all of those iterations of the game, the one we know today as Resident Evil 4 was born. And taking place a whole 6 years after Resident Evil 2, our returning hero Leon has moved on from his police career due to the whole zombie outbreak on the first day thing. So since then, Leon has been through years of training to work for an unnamed secret government security service. That's right, he works for the government now. That's because he knows the importance of a good benefits package. Dude got attacked by one of these. You get attacked by one of these, you are without a doubt looking for the most premium insurance plan. But now Leon is tasked with rescuing the president's daughter after she was kidnapped and taken to a remote village somewhere in Spain. My assumption is that he started a standard secret service job because he mentions that she was kidnapped just days before he was going to start working as her bodyguard, and that's what they do. So they could have named it. But more importantly, we need to stop this man from getting jobs. First, he starts as a cop and the entire city is flooded with zombies. Then he starts at the Secret Service and the president's daughter gets kidnapped. Please no one let this man work around nuclear weapons, schools, vets' offices, near people, or cities in general. Maybe don't let the man work. Leon arrives escorted by 2 police officers, and they stop just before the village because the road kind of just becomes trees. So they stay with the car while Leon sets out to ask the locals if they've seen the president's daughter Ashley, and quickly notice something is wrong with the villagers. And that is where we take over the sticks of Resident Evil 4. You'll quickly realize that every version of this game that went through in development was all tied together to make something entirely new. This is where Resident Evil would see its biggest series revamp ever. The pre-rendered backgrounds have gone away to make room for entirely 3D environments, because now, for the first time ever in this series, you have full control of movement with the fixed cameras traded out for over-the-shoulder perspective. Well, not entirely full control. It's actually kind of an abridged version of the tank controls. Yes, you can run in a zigzag stream, which is a massive improvement on tank control, but you still have to stop moving and stand in place to aim, and you also still use your movement stick instead of the camera stick to move around your aim laser. You also won't immediately go in the direction you point the stick. If you point it forward, he goes forward. If you point it backwards, he walks backwards, but not turning around. Holding backwards makes Leon walk backwards. To turn around and move the other direction quickly, you have to make use of the quick turn, like we saw in Code Veronica. Other major improvements would be that the knife is no longer an item. Now you get a dedicated knife button, and you can use it at any time without switching your equipped weapon, and it won't take any of the slots of your inventory. But let's be honest, you kind of want to be in that inventory, because this is the single greatest inventory system ever made in a game ever. This is the highlight of Resident Evil 4. No game has ever or will ever have a better inventory system than the case. Nothing makes you feel more like returning to your childhood bedroom than opening the Resident Evil 4 case. The case is home. It is also the most addictive game on its own without the rest of Resident Evil 4. It's also been turned into its own game. If there were a counter for the amount of times I've opened the case in a single playthrough of Resident Evil 4, it would rival the amounts of shots fired. Because the number one rule of Resident Evil 4 is organize your case. Organized case is a happy case. No matter what I'm doing, even including like a speed run, I will stop at every single item pickup to make sure it is placed in its designated slot in the case. Weapons here, ammo here, grenades here, miscellaneous stuff here, until all your general areas are full and you just kind of have to jam stuff in the cracks. Clearly there's something a little wrong with me if the organization of a case in a 20-year-old game matters as much to me as it does. But if I catch you in my home, or even your own home for that matter, with an unorganized case, I will make you leave. That's right, even your own home. Get out. Get out of your own home, organize your case, or get out. Sorry I got sidetracked there. I'm very passionate about the case. There is still plenty of other new additions to this game, like the appearance of QuickTime events. Love them or hate them, these things are a massive staple of Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. This trilogy of games loves the QuickTime event. Capcom went nuts with these for a couple years, and they appeared in like all of their games, not just Resident Evil. They appeared so much to the point that people never wanted to see them again, and they still hate them today. But all of Resident Evil 4's coolest and biggest set pieces take place within QuickTime events because it allows a very stiff gameplay style to open up massively to all these different animations. A lot of people argue that a big portion of the fear in Resident Evil is dealing with the difficult controls. I don't think that's necessarily true, although I probably did say that in an earlier video that you should probably go watch, but I don't think it necessarily applies to these fully 3D games. Because once you figure out the controls of these games, you've got them mastered, and it becomes so much easier. It's not like the original tank control games. Those will still somehow be a problem when you've done something a billion times. But this mastery of controls doesn't necessarily carry over to QuickTime events. Sure, once you've played through the game, you know where all of them are gonna be at, and you know it's either gonna be 2 face buttons or 2 triggers. But that's still gonna trip you up occasionally. Not counting that, when you're first playing through the game, they're gonna surprise you almost every time because you won't expect it to show up. But also, I'm just a QuickTime event apologist. I like them. I like the way they break up the pacing of the game. I always have. You're not gonna change my opinion.
I'm Ricky Bobby. If you don't
Like QuickTime events,
then you.
another addition that would change Resident Evil in a big way is the introduction of the Merchant. The Merchant is one of the most iconic characters in the franchise.
What are you selling? Thank you. What are you buying?
That could be white noise for me. I go to sleep to that every day. Everyone loves the Merchant. There's not a single person that likes video games that doesn't like the Merchant. Even if you don't like Resident Evil, you could despise Resident Evil, you're still going to get hyped when you see the Merchant. This guy is probably number 2 on the top video game characters of all time. On the video game Mount Rushmore, it probably goes Mario, the Merchant, Gex, Knack. I haven't really explained the Merchant yet, so you're no longer stuck to the resources you find while you play. The Merchant will sell you everything from first aid spray to a full rocket launcher, and even a rocket launcher that has infinite ammo, so you can continuously rocket to the end of time. And you can find money to spend at the Merchant by scavenging or killing enemies or selling things like treasures and everything else you own, so you can buy a rocket launcher with infinite ammo. You don't really need much else when you have a rocket launcher with infinite ammo. But I haven't really mentioned the biggest change that will affect the series forever. This game doesn't have any zombies. Not a one zombie is in this game. Instead, the enemies are humans infected by the Las Plagas. The Plaga are an ancient parasite that infects hosts through injections. The Plaga allow the host to perform basic functions and use tools and form social circles. And they just happen to use those social circles to form a cult, which is led by an Osmond Sadler. But we're not quite to that yet. Let me throw in a couple more new creature things before we get to him, because this game likes to constantly keep you on your toes with new enemies. Once you learn how to take down a monster, they'll evolve, or a new type will appear immediately after. Basic Ganados' heads will start popping off, unleashing these giant head-eating worms or these head-cutting-off worms. There's a lot of head removal enemies in this game. It seems they were like really into decapitation at this time. It's a little questionable. We'll try to think about it, because I am just also basing that off of all the things that are in this game, like head-eating parasites and chainsaw men that cut your head off, or blind men with Wolverine claws that will cut your head off with their giant claws. Lots of head removers around the island. Kind of suspicious. But that's also surprisingly not the worst way Leon can go. He can also be pulled into lava, or have his face melted off, or cut up by lasers. He has a lot of options. But where I was originally going to is that the Plaga is very versatile, mutating giant fish, giant people, walking suits of armor, little spider Plaga. If you can think it, they can Plaga it. It's a dumb joke. And I think that's like all the new stuff. Mercenaries, the fan favorite wave-based minigame, makes a return again, but nothing else new other than that I can think of. Nothing related to like a shooting range and little figurines that make my blood boil. Really glad there isn't a minigame like that, one that's rigged and nobody has ever actually completed. There definitely wouldn't be a bunch of clearly faked videos of people acting like they have no problem completing them and getting all the bottle cap figurines. While I can't manage to do any of them, and it's the only thing holding me back from 100% completion, it would really make me mad if something like that were to be in this game, especially if it stopped me from getting all the achievements in every version of this game. And if it did exist, I would refuse to acknowledge its existence, because it would be dumb to put that in such a perfect game. Anyways, this one's getting a little long-winded, so let's get into the story, which won't be as detailed as I've done before, because this game is fairly standalone. While searching the village, Leon saves a dog. He saves the dog. Regardless of what you did when you played, Leon saves the dog. Then he finds that his police friends have been murdered before he gets attacked by the entire village, but barely makes it out alive because everyone was late for bingo.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Oh, I also forgot to mention that Leon is sassy now. Like, way sassier.
No thanks, bro. Sadler, you're small time.
Sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
He then meets Louis Serra, a former researcher for the Los Illuminados cult, who helped alter the Plagas parasite to be used for mind control purposes. Louis, after discovering what his research was used for, was overwhelmed with guilt and tried to find a way out, ending up in contact with the organization. But before we get to that, Leon and Louis are knocked out and injected with the Plagas parasite. Now, Leon is tasked with two missions: saving Ashley Graham and finding a way to stop the infection of the Plagas parasite. Leon does eventually find Ashley being held in a church and escapes with her. Ashley has also happened to have been infected with the Las Plagas, so with Louis as their guide, they set out to find a way to remove the parasite. They then make it to a castle, and Ashley is captured once again by a Ramon Salazar, who I said we'd touch on in this video, but he's just a small guy that dresses funny, and his right hand comes off. Not really. I love this character. He's bizarre in only the way a Resident Evil character can be. He's creepy and goofy, harmless and terrifying at the same time. He's an all-timer Resi character. But for the video, we'll just leave it at that. So the most important thing about him right now is that he captures Ashley. And on his quest to get her back, Leon runs into Ada Wong, who somehow survived this? Unless this is your first Resident Evil anything, then you should already know to just never ask the question, how? When it comes to Resident Evil, it just does. Ada is there working for the previously mentioned organization, who has agreed to help Louis off the island for a sample of the Las Plagas. From there, Leon makes his way through the sewers and finds Ashley, but as he's about to save her, Louis runs in with a drug to suppress the Plagas infection, but is killed by the cult leader, Osmond Sadler. And we're going to stop at this bus stop for a second, because I also want to talk about Louis for a bit. He's a little bit of a controversial character. He's been rewritten and censored over the years for his sleazy and misogynistic lines, but the story of Louis is one I really enjoy, regardless of how weird they made his character. He's almost an analog to Wesker, but he realized what he was doing was wrong and tried to atone for it, opposed to Wesker, who is just a bad guy that wants to be more bad. So I would have liked to see more of how that story could have played out had Louis escaped. But the most interesting thing about all of that is that the organization was supposed to save Louis is run by Albert Wesker. And that's kind of the only connection to the greater universe of Resident Evil. That Wesker doesn't end up getting a sample of the Las Plagas, leading to the events of Resident Evil 5. But once again, that's tomorrow problem. Ashley is taken to a military island before Leon can save her, and this is easily the most hated section of the game. So Leon kills Salazar after he becomes a giant blob monster, and then he hops on a boat with Ada, saves Ashley, blows up Sadler with a rocket launcher, thanks to Ada's help of course, mirroring the ending of Resi 2, and then they escape on a dope jet ski race against the clock. And that is Resident Evil 4. But I can't talk about Resident Evil 4 without mentioning that on later releases, the game got kind of a pre-internet download DLC with two game modes, Assignment Ada and Separate Ways, with the first being a timed mode to find 5 samples around a map, and the other being a full story mode where you play through Ada's side of assisting Leon by ringing church bells and throwing rocket launchers. So that's where I'll leave you at, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for a dive into Resident Evil 5, which is possibly the most controversial game of the entire series. But before that, if you could, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, do the likes and the comments. Let me know about the first time you ever played Resident Evil 4. Is it your favorite game in the series also? Do you love it as much as I do? I would genuinely love to hear the stories of someone who cares as much about this game as I do. When I played this game for VR in the first time, I had tears. It was just kind of overwhelming to me to experience it in that way. Also, if you're not busy on a Thursday night around 9 p.m. Central, swing by, come check out a stream. I'm still playing through all the Tony Hawk games. I'm having a great time there. And with that, I'll see you tomorrow. Go play Resident Evil 4.